All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first of our lecture series this semester. And what a way to start. I mean, I have the most amazing honor to introduce Professor Neil Leach this afternoon. This will be the least formal possible introduction ever. I think that I can play one of Neil Leach's tricks when I say when he introduces somebody, for the most amazing people that he introduces to the lectures that he organizes, say he will be introducing Frank Gehry, he'll be introducing even Zaha Hadid, she were with us. She will say, such and such person needs no introduction. And that when you say that, it has a gravitas. It means that that person is extremely important in the field. It means that that person has made so many important contributions. And in particular, I think one of the strengths of Neil Leach is that he's someone that binds people together and creates culture. A good example of that is his teaching and research platform called Digital Futures. I believe teaching and research is a good definition of it, right? Whereby, through Digital Futures, he engages really with people that are making important contributions to our culture, the culture of design, architecture, and thinking throughout the world. And that in itself is an important accomplishment. I believe I've met Neil in person, he might or might not remember, about 10 years ago, in a conference that organized by Liz Werner and our very own Madeline Gannon. And he was then very much into, and continues to be, into the architecture of the moon. Research that is one of most compelling that he's been doing. And I believe the next time I had the chance to meet Neil in person was when he joined us here at FIU as a professor in 2016, I believe, when he organized a panel on the importance and the influence of 3D printing in architecture when he was writing a journal about that. And so, he apparently doesn't sit still. He's constantly, wherever there is something really, really hot, a topic that is really important and a topic that is hinting at where things might go, you probably will find Neil Leach influencing and allowing other people to sort of move the culture through that topic. So I really don't have much more to say, and that should be a lot, because I think it's an incredible act of generosity to be able to generate these networks of knowledge that are passing through Neil. And in a way, there's a certain energy. When a certain energy passes through us, it's an energy that is feeding back constantly. And I think that as such, to have Neil Leach being a professor at FIU and leading our doctorate program, it's really something for you to consider, how incredibly honored we are to be able to have him share his knowledge with us this afternoon. So I really don't have much more to add, and I'll let Neil speak about alien intelligence. It sounds so much more interesting than artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I'm a bit embarrassed now. Let me first say, though, that I don't know if you guys realize, but FIU is actually a kind of center of AI and has been for a while. In fact, it was George Tabella, who back in 2017 was working on machine learning, and I was supervising him for his master's thesis. That was my first time teaching that, and since there's been lots happening. But more importantly, we have on the DDES, I don't know, I was just thinking, could we call her the Elon Musk of architecture? But we have someone called Wanyu He. I'll talk about her. She wrote the first ever book on AI and architecture. She is the CEO of LookX, which is turning into the most important AI software developer in the world. I think it is the most important. And we also have on the DDES, we have Philippe Morel, who's one of the leading theorists of AI. So it's actually quite a center. And if only we'd held on to Daniel Bolajan, who was a visiting professor here a few years ago, we would absolutely, no question, be the center of AI. But there is a lot happening you might not be aware of. So today, this is going to be, I can't hear from my right ear for some reason. I went swimming this morning and I can't hear, so my apologies if you ask me a question I can't hear. But today I want to kind of just introduce you to really kind of basic information, like what is AI, how does it generate images, what is it going to do in the future, and I'm going to finish off with 10 rules or 10 predictions about the future of AI in architecture. But I want to start off, kind of preface the whole thing by talking about some of the things that have been happening that maybe we're not aware of or we don't pay much attention to recently. If you ask most people what AI is, they'll think it's ChatGPT or Midjourney. These are applications of AI, and we often don't think about the bigger picture. So I want to sort of say a few words about that. So, and I'm starting off with this image, which came out of Midjourney 5.2. You guys should all be using Midjourney, right? This is absolutely standard. And it comes out as a monolith, and it wasn't intended to be that at all, but you can't control Midjourney. Actually, in the prompt it said house, but we have this monolith, and it kind of reminded me of that amazing scene in probably the greatest ever movie, 2001, A Space Odyssey. And let me just see if I can play. I can't have any sound, that's unfortunate. Okay. Why am I not moving forward? Okay. Okay, there should have been a recording of the 2001 theme going on there. But those of you who have seen the movie remember this kind of weird monolith that's appeared. It's some kind of vehicle for extraterrestrial aliens. Joseph, there's a seat at the front here for you if you want to come down. It's a weird scene because you also see these very primitive kind of half ape, half Homo sapiens, our predecessors, and one of them picks up a bone at that point in that movie, and it's the first tool we ever developed. And I want to talk about a tool that possibly could even be our last tool, and also the notion of a kind of what I call alien intelligence. But Stanley Kubrick was the person who, of course, directed 2001: A Space Odyssey, but he was helped by a guy called Arthur C. Clarke, a Brit. And I'm just hoping this is going to be able to play. If it isn't, I'm in trouble. No. I'm not getting sound here. This is, okay, let me go back. Okay, you can't hear this, can you? Sorry?
No, it's not. Because it's connected there. I'm not IT.
Hold on a second. So how do I get the sound on? Let me just
I don't know.
try this one.
No, it should be, your sound should be there.
I'm going to try one.
Select the computer where?
Yeah, the audio in the preferences. Also maybe the preferences of your Mac.
It says second output.
It's, okay, it's got the wrong sound on. You should have checked this up beforehand.
In the setting app? Because it's connected to his computer.
I mean, I can just take this out.
Because it's connected to his computer through HDMI, so. Try now? No, the video.
Otherwise, in the preferences of your audio here, so that you can hear.
And that's where you're playing. But.
Yeah. It's on full there.
Hold on. Now it should be playing.
Let me just take this off.
Yeah, take that off.
I'll try that. Why is it not
There's that guy. Is he press play here? Nothing. Where's it so tiny? No, top here.
there?
Yeah, that's fine. Go up a little bit more. See, it's playing here. Is it playing? On the, yeah, he's talking. This thing is talking.
Okay.
No, right? Yeah.
I suspect it, okay, this is going to be a bit of a problem.
Well, do you have your audio? Doing what?
On mute the Zoom. There's a on mute button on the
But that's
top
just
left.
the microphone, no?
Yes. You see that top left?
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, let's try that.
Pero then. Hold on, Neil. Don't touch me. What? Which one? This down here? It's just that it's a full screen here, so I have to escape. Hold on.
Let's go down here. That one there. That one. Oh, that one. You guys, okay. Do we need it on full screen now?
Hold on. Here. And then this. I know, but we're just trying to do something. We're testing things out first. When you do full screen, you can't do anything.
Okay.
So it's not working. It's unmuted.
Let me just try this. I'll try this again. I'll try
Why
that.
is this plugged in?
Take that out. Getting something on the wrong thing.
There's that. Where's the audio here?
No, this is the audio here.
As a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. I suspect that organic or
Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote the book 2001: Space Odyssey, and also collaborated with Stanley Kubrick on the movie itself. This video was done in 1963, and I think it's amazing because what he's talking about is exactly where we are now. Did I press here?
Press up here. There. No. Here, I got it.
However, the most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys. They'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's computers. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. I suspect that organic or biological evolution has about come to its end, and we are now at the beginning of inorganic or mechanical evolution, which will be thousands of times swifter.
He was able to come up with that so many years ago. So now we find ourselves suddenly catapulted into the world of ChatGPT, Midjourney, and so on. And those of us who are working in the field, and I would say that there was actually no one was paying any attention to AI at all. In 2019, I teamed up with Zahidid Architects and was sponsored by Google. We also had Refik Anadol, who had been here for a lecture, and Refik Anadol is the rock star of media art, AI media art. We submitted a proposal to curate the British Pavilion for Venice Biennale, and we didn't get shortlisted even. We were not shortlisted. And all of a sudden, since 2019 and 2023, things have changed incredibly. Now, I was talking at this very spot to my students about OpenAI and about how disturbing some of the things it was doing, but nobody really registered quite what it could do until suddenly we discovered what it could do. And frankly, it does something much better than we ever quite imagined. And so what's happened, of course, is a bunch of very significant individuals are kind of sounding the alarm about what has been going on. And it's become very clear that AI is able to learn a whole bunch of things. It can learn different languages, it can learn to code, it can translate, it can learn maths, and I want to point out it's learned to design. And it's something that we never quite predicted. And it all goes down to these things, large language models. Now, that sounds so unsexy. First of all, it's not just large, it is absolutely gigantic. This has been, these GPT systems have been trained on enormous amounts of data with trillions of parameters. It is absolutely enormous. And they're quite straightforward in terms of the code. There's only like 200 lines of code, but they're doing things that we never expected them to do. And that is, I think, in some ways, the alarming thing. And as a result of this particular letter came out, a kind of calling for a pause to the development of these large language models. And this might have passed you by, you weren't quite sure what it was talking about and so on, but the people in the know were quite disturbed by it. But of course, there's nothing you can do. Like, you can't tell people to stop doing certain things. It's a bit like telling the leader of the Olympic marathon to slow down a bit. Of course, you're not going to slow down because your competitor's going to catch up. But it was this particular reference here to, at the very bottom, that I want to refer to, emergent capabilities. Now, if you heard that, you say, I don't know what that means, move on. Whatever. But that is the interesting kind of concept. So maybe I could just sort of talk a little bit about emergence, what it means. It's something that I was been working on before in swarm intelligence, and it's something we know about because we can see this in nature the whole time. Emergence refers to what happens when a multi-agent system, like a flock of birds or indeed ants laying pheromone trails, they start developing a kind of something in a bottom-up way emerges out of their collective behavior that is greater than the sum of the parts. These birds are just following straightforward instructions, keep a certain distance from the bird either side and front and so on. But out of this a weird kind of beautiful choreography emerges. And the term emergence has been discussed by scientists over the years, from John Holland onwards. And it's a basic principle that we observe everywhere, but no one can explain. It is somehow almost magical in the way that it operates, and science hasn't yet developed a way of explaining it. And if we go back to Arthur C. Clarke, and one of his comments is basically, magic is simply science we don't understand yet. And I think what's happening now is that we don't understand this. So, and I want to just bring in this guy, Geoffrey Hinton, who is actually the key guy behind everything. He's a Brit. A lot of Brits in this story. He's the great-great-grandson of George Boole of Boolean geometry fame, and he actually, I found out the other day, he studied architecture for 2 days in Cambridge. He applied to Cambridge, and I think it took him 2 days to move to a different discipline, and thank God he did, because he is the genius who's basically given us these neural networks that are so extraordinary. And he was obsessed because he comes from this very kind of intellectual family, and he was interested in neuroscience and was convinced the way to get to AI was to understand the brain. So he was pushing ahead of neural networks when everyone was just ignoring them because they weren't really working. But all of a sudden, around 2006, we got GPUs and things, and computers became extremely powerful and fast, and suddenly these neural networks worked in a certain sort of way. And now we're getting to the point, they kind of think. Anyway, let me just play Geoffrey Hinton talking about why he's alarmed by this. You probably saw in the news he was working for Google as a consultant, and he eventually gave up this post at Google so that he could speak out about his concerns about the very creature that he's been kind of, that he was really responsible for. So here we go. Oh, I'm going to try and get this right. I'm going to go in.
It made me realize that these digital intelligences have something we don't have that makes them much better. When one of them knows something, it can tell all the others. That's what we don't have with people. So imagine you had 10,000 people, and imagine if when one person learned something, everybody knew it. You could learn a lot more stuff, right? And that's why things like ChatGPT knows like 10,000 times as much as any one person. It's because when you train it, there's lots of different copies looking at different bits of the data and learning stuff, and they can all combine what they learn instantly with a bandwidth of like trillions of bits.
So can they think?
Yes. So imagine the following scenario. I'm talking to chatbot and we talk for a bit and the answers it's given me seem a bit strange to me, and I suddenly realize that it thinks I'm a teenage girl. And I say, what demographic do you think I am? And it says it thinks I'm a teenage girl. So the question is, when I said I suddenly realized it thinks I'm a teenage girl, was that a metaphorical use of the word think, or was that just the same way as we use think? And I strongly believe that use of the word think, when I said it thinks I'm a teenage girl, was exactly the same way of using think as we do with people.
And so that was enough to make you say, what, this has accelerated beyond my comfort level?
I suddenly realized maybe they already are better, and making them more like real neural nets isn't the point. They're already better than us. They're a better way of doing learning. And if we make them bigger, they'll get much smarter than us. They already know more than any one person.
I understand that things could go awry, but I still think that people hear the notion of danger and they dismiss it as hyperbole.
I thought it was hyperbole for a long time because I thought these things were a long way off. I thought there will eventually be danger, but I thought focusing on it now is unnecessary because it'll be 30 to 50 years before these things get more intelligent than us. But this combination of realizing that they might have a much better way of learning than we have, because they can share knowledge instantly, and seeing things like ChatGPT or Palm at Google that can explain why a joke is funny, made me realize these things are already pretty intelligent, and if they've got a better form of intelligence than ours, then it gets to be much more urgent.
So basically, this is all because of its emergent capabilities. It's developing the capacity to kind of think, to kind of understand. I mean, if you can explain a joke, you mustn't be able to understand the joke in the first place. That's his point. And also a kind of intelligence, you know, and it's not the same as human intelligence. It's not the same as human understanding. It's not the same as human thinking, but there is something happening that is superior to us. And I think our real problem in the past has been looking at AI and saying, well, it can't do what we do. It's not sentient. It's not self-aware. It's not conscious. Well, take it from a different perspective and think about what we can't do compared to computers. And you see it in a different sort of way. In my lectures, I often talk about the second Copernican revolution. We need to go and realize that we are not the center of intelligent life forms in the universe, and there are other forms of life that are out there, intelligence, that are much superior. And I think that is something we've got to grasp and deal with. And according to some commentators, in a few years' time, they're going to be billions of times smarter than us. So already he mentioned 10,000 times, ChatGPT mentioned 10,000 times, knows 10,000 times more than we do. Soon it's going to be out of range. And, you know, I think that, well, I'll move on. Anyway, Yuval Harari has made this comment that AI has hacked into our operating system, or hacked our operating system. In other words, it understands words and in an astonishing way. So it can translate, it understands words, and it can write code. I also would claim that it's learned how to design. And I say this for a particular reason. This is just one of the, if you do a Midjourney, you guys can do this kind of thing, right? And it takes about 3 minutes. Right? And you look at this landscape here. Now, I didn't say anything in the prompt, except contemporary modernist house in the Austrian Alps. It has laid that out, every single tree and whatever, totally convincingly. I don't know whether Roberta would think that, but certainly in terms of landscape, it's done this. And it's also kind of got a sense of composition, how things go together. And it's done that basically because there's so many billions of examples it draws upon, and it's able to learn the rules of how these things operate. And so, you know, it does it for us. You know, or this one, for example, I just asked for a kitchen. And it produces, I don't know, a thing at the back that looks like a coffee maker and things, and there's a painting on the wall. Not a bad painting on the wall. It wasn't in the prompt, and it's doing this. It's doing this automatically, and I find that particularly astonishing. And it's not just simply the kind of putting the things where they need to be, but understanding the kind of tectonic conditions in which we're doing architecture. It can do that. Now, you've got to be good at the prompts, right? And most of you tried Midjourney, you probably get it wrong. And it's kind of alchemy, because the prompts are very difficult to understand. Prompt engineering is the wrong term, because it's really more alchemy. But it's doing this. It's understanding things, getting the reflections and so on, and doing all this. I'm just blown away by this. Now, these are just images, right? But my point is that what is underway right now, and it is an FIU DDes student who's developing this Wanyu software that will come online in 2 to 3 years' time, that will look at the whole process, and I'll talk more about. There's a whole process, but we get a glimpse from how it can deal with images so well as to how it's going to deal with the other sort of processes. Anyway, the last year was the year in which all these books started coming out, the beginning of the year. Mine was the first one, the top left. It actually came out in December of 2021 in the UK, and over here in the next few months later. And that was important. These are the 2 books that I was involved in, the AD, machine hallucinations as well. And so last year we got that. But we also got this, which is to say, on the left, the first ever GAN-generated image. I'll tell you what that means. And on the right, another example of what you can get through these diffusion models, through Midjourney and so on. We suddenly got to a different level in terms of imagery, which meant all those books were out of date. All those books were out of date because we were working with GANs, and suddenly there's something new on the scene, and I will talk about that. So what I want to do today, and it's really about information and nothing else, really telling you what this thing is, how did it emerge, how it's going to be used in architecture, and what about the 10 predictions for the future. So what is AI? And I think the important thing is to realize that there is this kind of field of research in AI, which we're talking about, not the applications, not ChatGPT. And the research in the field is basically, this is quite an important quote, because it's really saying, Margaret Bowden saying, it seeks to make computers do the sorts of things that minds can do. And the key word there is mind, the idea of a neural network, which has become so significant. So this on the left-hand side, the neural network of the brain, on the right-hand side, the neural network of artificial neural networks. And they are actually totally different. The artificial neural networks are only loosely modeled on the brain itself. And what you've got here is, these are the neurons, and these are the synapses, and there are thousands of these hidden layers. And what happens, the information gets processed from left to right, governed by the weights and the synapses that control it and so on. And that's the basic sort of model. The big difference, though, is that AI doesn't have consciousness. It's not aware. So these days, if you ask people, they will think of something like Sophia the robot as being an example of AI. But this is, in the industry, they totally despise Sophia. This is a kind of complete con. You haven't got to be a humanoid robot to be able to do this kind of stuff. So there's, and then from Excalibur, you get sort of humans playing as robots. But really, the reality is AI's got nothing to do with humanoid robots. It's all about code. It's software. It's very sophisticated software, but it's software nonetheless. But as such, it's invisible. We can't actually see it. It's not there. So in the office of the future, we are going to be surrounded by AI. In fact, we already are, but we're not going to be surrounded by humanoid robots. What we have, of course, are these AIs on our phones. It's what's filtering out our spam on our email. It's what's finishing off our sentences on Gmail. It's what's recognizing our friends on Facebook. It's what's allowing us to order Ubers, and so on and so on and so on. It's everywhere around us. But because it's invisible, we don't necessarily see it. So this is a quote from my book. It is as though the Earth has been invaded by an invisible, super-intelligent alien species. So how did it all emerge? Well, it was this guy, Alan Turing, another Brit, who was the first person who conceptualized the notion of some kind of computers and intelligence. But this was before the term itself wasn't developed until after actually Turing died. He tragically committed suicide. In 1956 in Dartmouth College, some of the smartest brains came together for a kind of workshop where they were planning to solve the basic problems in 2 years. And it was there that the term was coined by this guy you can see down here, John McCarthy. And they chose the term artificial intelligence. He said he was never very happy with the term, but he had to call it something. And for sure, I think the danger is that it's not artificial. It's synthetic maybe, but it's certainly not artificial. And intelligence only invites you to anthropomorphize it and think it in human terms. But it is, I think, a form of alien intelligence, but it's intelligence nonetheless. On the bottom right, 50 years later, in 2006, the the survivors, as it were, of that first meeting got back together. You can see Marvin Minsky in the center from MIT Media Lab. And they recognized that really AI had failed. The first 50 years, it had never achieved what it was expected to achieve. It was, of course, invented during the Cold War, and they really wanted to translate Russian and all this, and it was disastrous. It couldn't do these things. But by a strange coincidence, 2006 was suddenly the moment when Geoffrey Hinton's work began to pay off, and they began to realize that neural networks could work because of a series of very straightforward reasons, largely to do with vastly improved computing power and much quicker computers, down to GPUs, graphic processing units, that suddenly made these things incredibly powerful. So now we use the term AI, and we just at the very beginning. But what the difference between the initial concept of AI and what's happening now is even greater than the very first car and the kind of self-driving car today. It is absolutely hugely different. So deep learning is what we have at the moment, which is neural networks, which is really powering the difference. And that's what ChatGPT, all these things are based on. And deep learning is part of a subset of machine learning. It's part of AI itself. If you think of them like Russian dolls nested inside each other. But it's deep learning that is really powering everything. And there have been a couple of moments, there have been many moments, but I don't want to pick out two in the history of AI that have really brought it to our attention. In 1997, Gary Kasparov took on IBM's Deep Blue, and of course nobody thought he was going to lose. Gary Kasparov, one of the greatest chess players of all time, but lose he did, and this was the kind of comment they came up with. We just have to understand that everything we know how to do, machines will eventually do better than us, and I think that's very true. Although in certain areas it's better. Clearly at chess, it's way beyond better anymore. Anything you can do, AI can do better. But the real breakthrough came out in 2016 when they took on AlphaGo, again a Brit, a company in London, took on Lee Sedol, who was the kind of Gary Kasparov of Go. Really super famous, super talented. And the difference is this, basically, in 1997, they trained a computer on all the games of Go, of chess. But Go, which is actually quite a straightforward game in terms of its of the moves, but there are so many possibilities. There are more potential moves in Go than there are atoms in the universe. And this meant they had to basically engage with learning systems, with deep learning. And that's when things started getting very surprising. This is after game 2. Yesterday I was surprised, but today I am speechless. And the reason why was basically AlphaGo was playing these moves that everybody thought was a mistake. They thought they were glitches. And this is the most famous move, probably the most famous moment in the history of AI, where this game 2, move 37, and it puts this black stone here, which is unusual because normally it's on the 4th or the 3rd line. It puts it here. And everybody thought it was a mistake. But 100 moves later, it connected up with this, and it won the match. And so let me just see if I can play the Google commentators, and it's going to be a question of getting it right.
From the Google team was talking about is this kind of evaluation value?
That's a very surprising move.
I thought it was a mistake.
Yeah, it was no mistake.
From the Google.
And so the issue is not simply that it was operating at a level that it showed us what creativity was. And this is a comment from Lisa Doll. AlphaGo showed us that moves humans may have thought are creative were actually conventional. But the problem is it was doing things we couldn't even understand. Now, if you've got a dog, you know that a dog can smell or hear much greater range than you can. Well, this is what's happening. I mean, AI is so beyond us, it's probably going to look down at us and think we're just dumb creatures. But it's operating this kind of level. And what's interesting in architecture also, in some of these softwares that they've been using, they're discovering exactly the same thing. It does things that are totally counterintuitive. No architect would have thought about them, but then nonetheless, they're absolutely genius kind of moves. So we got a glimpse there, and this this moment was in terms of the history of AI. It was the moment when the Go playing nations suddenly got a wake-up call. And we don't play Go, so we didn't wake up. But China suddenly started developing as a result of this match. And President Xi gave this speech saying they were trying to overtake America by the year 2030, and they're well on their way. They're extremely good. So anyway. How does it use in architecture? So I'm going to just show you what the moment when I think the biggest breakthrough for Geoffrey Hinton, when people started paying attention to what he was doing, was this, when there was a competition in 2012 to see how you could recognize an image. Now, of course, we've got this, it's standard, right? Everyone's got facial recognition on their phones these days, but it was really quite an advance of those days. How do you recognize this? And they discovered, or Geoffrey Hinton's team came with neural networks, and they were much better, much more successful, much more reliable than anything else. And all of a sudden, everyone thinks, okay, we've got to go and follow this and do neural networks. So what happens? You take the pixels from the bird, and it gets kind of processed through different sort of layers until eventually it comes up with the idea that it's a bird. Never 100% sure. It's always 99% sure, but it's pretty close. And that was amazing. But what the real holy grail for AI scientists was to go the opposite, to hallucinate, to generate, to produce an image. And what they discovered is actually if you invert the network, in other words, you go from, instead of from left to right, you go from right to left, you can start off with a bird, and you can synthesize an image of a bird. And that led to this kind of weird, these kind of images called deep dream, where this is a neural network that's been trained on, looks like dogs and, I don't know, serpents and oil lamps or something. And this was incredible, but it was kind of trippy because the information about where things should be positioned had been lost in the process, so you get all this kind of mess. But nonetheless, this was quite a breakthrough and led to the first ever exhibition on AI-generated art in 2018. But it was this guy, Ian Goodfellow, who was studying in Canada, who discovered a technique that was much better called generative adversarial networks. And this is what really led to the breakthrough in terms of image generation. And what happens with generative adversarial network, there are two separate networks competing each other. There's a generator, which just produces images out of random noise, and a discriminator that judges them. It's a bit like, think of a kind of someone doing a fake Van Gogh, and then there's a critic saying, that's not good enough, that's not good enough. And eventually what happens is that the discriminator trains the generator until it produces really good images. Anyway, so what that produced was this kind of thing, which really was pretty remarkable at the time. These are all fake images, fake faces. And if you go to a site called This Person Does Not Exist, you will find there are countless you can do, every time you refresh your browser, you get these new images. And it wasn't long before architects were doing the same thing. This is when you heard, this is our DDEST candidates. You start producing buildings that are like this. They're just 2D. They look 3D, but they're just 2D images. But this was learning from all that kind of system. But the first person to actually produce something using a GAN was actually Refik Anadol, who came and gave a lecture here 2019. And he started inputting all the work of Zaha Hadid into this computer to see what you would hallucinate. And this is a very laborious process. It takes ages to load up all this information. You've got to know your software as well. It's not so straightforward. We were working with Daniel Bolojan here, and he was helping. But most people, it was tricky. But nonetheless, you eventually can produce something in this kind of latent spacewalk that picks up on some of the features, and eventually we get something coming out of the computer that actually begins to look pretty much like what Zaha might have designed herself. Even though she's no longer with us, we nonetheless can kind of hallucinate possible other images that kind of are similar to that. So this was, in a way, in a moment, we're going to see that first image just coming out of the computer screen. This was really the next breakthrough as well, realizing we could do this. And in the studios here, we're working with GANs for a few years on that thing. So here we go. So that was the image that then became the image on the front cover of my book. And alongside this, and I mentioned Daniel Bolojan before because he is the genius behind all this. He's been working for Coop Himmelblau and was behind this thing. This is the Deep Himmelblau project, which was then working not just with what we call style GANs, but with cycle GANs, much more complicated things, and taking 1,000 or so previous projects from the office, and then combining them and generating other possible projects. And in 2021, this was very much the state of the art. It won an Acadia Award, and these are some of the images. You get glitches. They're not totally perfect. You get glitches all over the place, but nonetheless, something's coming out that looks like a building of a sort, something. And this was, in fact, the image, the project we used for the front cover of machine hallucinations, the AD that came out. But then something else happened completely differently, and I was gave a talk at the AA, and Patrick Schumacher was in the audience, and I was saying, when are we going to wake up to possibilities of AI? When is this kind of AlphaGo moment going to come? And it happened in around beginning of April of 2022, and most architects had no access to this at the time. But this was the first thing that came out, and it's called Diffusion Model. This is DALI and Midjourney and so on. It works in a very different way to a GAN. It takes a random noise, and it disrupts an image, and in repairing the image, you get something new coming out. I won't go into that. But what you can do, basically, is you can put in a prompt, in this case, an astronaut on a horse. Now, there probably hasn't been an astronaut on a horse before, but it gives you an impression of what it would do if it were the case. And then at that time, Refik Anadol had been working with Zaha, and even though we didn't have access to DALI, they were experimenting what you could do, and all of a sudden we were producing much better images. These, of course, you don't need to have this technical expertise. It does it in 3 minutes. It renders these things, and it's astonishing. And of course, not just Zaha, but we all can do this. This is my stuff. If you want to look at it on Instagram, that's my address. And it starts producing some stuff that really we would never have imagined. It just expands the possibility. It becomes like a prosthesis to the human imagination. And gradually over time, Midjourney is getting better. These different versions are coming out. 5.2 is coming out, and 6 is about to happen. And you just write these prompts, and within 3 seconds, boom, they appear. I just think this is pretty astonishing, what you can produce. And what you're getting is everyone's posting this on Instagram, and you're getting architects producing a project every single, or several projects every single evening. I'd be asked for commissions because of this. This is a guy called David Orff who kind of just generates thousands of images every day. It's astonishing what you can produce. So we're getting a sense now of what the potential will be, but there's other stuff down the pipeline. Now, what I mentioned this thing before. This is not what's happening here, but I think in some sense this diagram shows what's happening. In other words, what's happening is it's enhancing the generator. It's producing many more ideas than we would have thought about ourselves, and we are simply selecting these things. I think human beings are very good discriminators. If you sniff a perfume or sip a cocktail, and very immediately you know whether you like it or not, but I don't think we've got the range of the imagination that we think we have, and the generator enhances that. Therefore, this is can be seen as a kind of a prosthesis to the human imagination. So there have been conferences about this, and this is a strange one that was going on in Texas, Architecture After AI. I don't think there's going to be after AI. AI is here to stay. And we're getting also some much more sophisticated work coming out. This is Daniel Bolojan again, who's been looking at how you can you can work not just with images, but with parameters, so that what's been generated, you can actually get a relationship between east, west, north, south facade, between interior and exterior, and it's beginning to get something much closer to an actual building. But then there are these companies. SpaceMaker's been bought by Autodesk. It's now called Forma, and XCool, LookX, this is Wanyu He, where they're doing this kind of, they've been exploring how this is going to work in the office and producing software that's not available yet. It will be available in 2 or 3 years' time, where you can start sort of, you can go much more than just straightforward images. So this is a project that Wanyu, they won a competition. There were 200 architects in it, and they used AI, and they won this competition. You can see how these blocks here on the right-hand side have been broken down. This is a kind of wind comfort thing, and it's a kind of form of topological optimization. And eventually, what emerges are kind of more kind of Gehry-like forms as it begins to sort of position it, and you get this coming out. And not only that, but it also can be used to things like sort of calculating the kind of, they have these panels, triangular sort of panels, and they produced like 2,000 initially, and they managed to kind of break it down to about 200 using a guy from Gehry Technologies. But using AI, they were able to break it down to just 12 different components. So all of a sudden, we've got something very new happening. And I don't know if anyone who's used LookX, but it's been very popular. This is something that's done by Tim Fu from Zaha's office. And what you do is the interesting about the LookX one is it's been trained on architecture, whereas Midjourney and DALI is just trained on generic images. This has been trained on, I think it's morphosis on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand is Gary. But basically what happens, it takes the crumpled paper and it starts interpreting it as a building. And this is getting pretty sophisticated, even though we're still just dealing with images. Maybe I can just show you, just as a bit of a light-hearted moment, The Simpsons, and if I can...
Great! We asked Frank Gehry to build us a concert hall.
Bill, Bow, Bill. Snoopy stationery.
Dear Mr. Gehry, would you please build a concert hall for our town? We may not be the biggest city or the prettiest, but we were the first city in America to abandon the metric system.
Frank Gehry, you're a genius. Behold, the new Springfield.
So, and then there are other, and just to say this is very for Thomas and others who are very much interested in performative AI, and there's also, how can I get this cursor? I can't find the cursor. Hold on. Oh, just a minute. Okay. There's also, this is Amoeba, there are a number of structural AI software packages. Autodesk also have one as well. But actually, this is not terribly advanced. This is kind of topological optimization, but it can be used to sort of look at the structural performance. And I think this is going to be the most important thing in the end, is be able to sort of develop a system that, not just images, but actually looking at the performance of the building in many different sort of ways. So this is Amoeba, and then actually Theodoros Galanis is also on the, he's kind of not been active for a while, but he's also on the DDES, and he wrote this software for infrared, which is dealing with thermal comfort, environmental control systems for AI. So that's another reason why FIU has been quite significant. Anyway, so let me finish off there with 10 predictions about the future of AI. And I think it's important to look forward and try and predict things in certain ways. I mean, so first of all, this is kind of obvious in some sense. AI will become an indispensable assistant in the architectural office. Elon Musk talks about how we've all become cyborgs in a sense. We all become superhuman. You have a machine extension of yourself in the form of your phone and your computer and all your applications. You are already superhuman. So we're using it as an extension. Rather than AI versus humans, we're thinking about AI plus humans, so as a form of extended intelligence. And you're getting, with, of course, by the use of the cloud and things, you're able to access GPUs, so you can do it from your cell phone. That's kind of obvious in some sense. Buildings will become intelligent. Well, the logic behind this is what's called the digital twin. I don't know if you know about this, but how you have a kind of you have real-time feedback from your actual building or your actual car or whatever it was, and you use AI to basically as the kind of brain to control the heating systems and so on. So for sure, that'll be a central part of how we operate in our houses. Cities will be controlled by AI. I published in 2009 this AD Digital Cities, which actually was kind of interesting because all the architects were thinking about what was the style of the new buildings. This is a Zaha project for Istanbul that was never built. But Patrick was talking about parametricism, and this is actually where he first wrote about parametricism, how that would be the way forward. I don't think that the city of the future is going to look anything like that. I mean, is it going to look like something out of a kind of science fiction, or is it going to be more like what the cities of today? And this is LA, and I think it's going to be like this. The cities of the future are not going to look so different. There'll be a few new buildings, of course, but basically they look the same. But what's going to be different is the way that informational systems are being used in those cities. So it's not a question of form. It's not a question of what things look like, but how they operate. And if you think about, for example, getting an Uber is working in a new way. Does it look different to an ordinary car? No, because it is an ordinary car. It's the way that we process information and we order the Uber that is so significant. So what's going to happen in cities in the future, and this is an example from China where there's a company called CityBrain where they are basically using this digital twin to control the traffic, so there are no traffic jams, and if there's an accident, they can get the emergency vehicles there much more quickly. So cities in the future will be controlled by AI. Fourthly, clients will start to insist that their architects use AI. Well, they already do. And this is a quote from Harvard Hochland from SpaceMaker AI. It's now a former. Which basically the developers are asking their architects, can you please use AI? And why are they asking that? Well, there are two reasons. One is that you can get a much better return on your investment if you optimize things, and AI can optimize things. And secondly, frankly, humans make mistakes. AI doesn't make mistakes. So it's a much more reliable way of going forward. Fifthly, professional indemnity insurance will increase if you're not using AI. And the way to think about this is there's a guy called Toby Walsh who wrote a book called Machines That Think, and he predicts that we will not be driving in the future. We'll be banned from driving. And why does he think this? Well, basically, Uber cars are going to come along. You've got an Uber taxi. They already have versions of that in San Francisco. You're going out in the evening, and you think, okay, I'll just take one of these self-driving Ubers, and I don't have to worry about drinking. And eventually, because you're using these vehicles so often, your driving skills will get a little bit not so good. And these cars are going to get better and better and better, and we're going to start losing our driving skills to the point that insurance premiums are going to go up if you drive on your own, and eventually you'll say, it's so expensive, what the hell, I'll just use a self-driving car. At least that's the prediction. I'm not sure it's going to come true, but that's the prediction. But that also tends to suggest that also in architecture, professional indemnity will go up for those who are not using AI. Economics will be the main driver of change. This is one of the most famous books about the future of professions by, again, two Brits, Richard and Daniel Susskind, where they predict that actually professions will start to disappear. And the main reason why they will disappear is they're kind of like a gentleman's agreement at the moment. It's a social contract that architects police architecture and engineers engineering and doctors and so on. But in the end, the cost is going to be the issue. And when you get cost over, eventually you will do away with these professional structures because they don't make sense in an era where cost cutting is going to be the case. So that's what they're arguing. We are on the brink of a period of fundamental and irreversible change. Technology will be the main driver of this change, and in the long run, we will neither want nor need nor want professionals to work in the way they did in the 20th century and before. When profits trump clients, when the incentives and reward systems of professional businesses favor cash over culture, and when ethics entails minimal compliance by box ticking, the grand bargain looks outmoded. So they think that the professional thing will fall apart. It'll all be about cost cutting. Having said that, I think that and it's going to basically mean that there's going to be bidding to lower in terms of the fees, which is going to be disastrous for architects in the end. Because if you think about architecture as a profession, it gets its money from a percentage of the building cost. Now, there are not going to be any more buildings. So if at the moment, say you're getting 5% and people start bidding less and you're getting people doing it for 2% or 1%, which is happening in China already, there's going to be less money coming into the profession by quite a significant amount, and that's going to be disastrous. The only exception to this is going to be the kind of star architects like Zaha and so on, where if you buy a Prada bag or if you buy a Gucci bag, it's not about saving money. It's to show that you don't care about money. It's kind of conspicuous consumption, and so I'm sure that they'll still be doing okay. AI will undoubtedly have an impact on employment. There's no question about that. I think that the Hollywood industry has woken up to this, but we haven't in architecture. We're just not aware of this. This was an article that was in The Guardian just recently, and I have a few quotes in that. I think the issue, what we're discovering right now, is this is a kind of Tesla factory, right? And what we all thought was going to happen was that robots were going to take over everything and do all the manual labor. They were going to replace the blue-collar workers. But actually, robots are not so sophisticated. If you put a pile of Lego bricks on a table and ask a robotic arm to pick it up and stack it up into a building, it actually struggles to do that. We're still struggling to get motility to robotic arms, but AI has been racing ahead. And I'd always thought, basically, if things get bad in architecture, you can go into computer science and do AI yourself. But the point is, AI's learned how to code. So it's the white-collar workers, the architects, the computer scientists, the engineers, the doctors, the lawyers, who are actually most at threat from this effect. There was a study done in 2013 looking at which professions would be most at risk from this. And you get some of them well, there are about 700 here, and I think architecture's down to number 70 or something. Where are we now? The architectural managers hang on a bit longer. And then eventually telemarketeers, well, they've all disappeared already, right? The problem about this analysis, it was basically is on humans versus AI. Now, that's the wrong thing. It should be looking at a human using AI versus a human not using AI. And in certain tasks, not all the tasks, but you can find that one person using AI can produce as much as 5 people not using AI. If I can generate one of those earlier projects in 3 minutes, I mean, this is something significant. So it's bound to have some implications on this. I put an article in Dezeen. Someone has said, don't worry about AI, it's not going to take any jobs away. And I said, what are you talking about? And they commissioned me to write this. AI is putting our jobs as architects unquestionably at risk. And the response was kind of interesting. People who knew about AI said, yes, of course, we all knew that. There's nothing new here, right? And those who didn't know about AI, I got some incredible pompous comments like, there's not a single AI on the market that possibly match my ingenuity and creativity. That guy's going to be the first to go, right? And this is the kind of problem I think that everybody has. And we go back to Gary Kasparov and Lisa Doll and so on. Jack Ma basically falls for this. I never in my life say human beings will be controlled by machines. It's impossible. Human beings can never create another thing that is smarter than human beings. And then Elon Musk corrects, and I very much disagree with that. The biggest mistake I see people making is to assume they're smart. People underestimate the capabilities of AI. They sort of think it's like a smart human, but it's going to be much smarter than the smartest human you will ever know. And this was a few years ago, but we know that's absolutely the case, that ChatGPT does as much as 10,000 times as much as any of us. And then this is really where we bring Wan Yu in here, because AI will be able to generate buildings conforming to all constraints. At the moment, the way we operate in an office is we kind of, something like Zaha's office, you will maybe, now these days you might use Midjourney, then you go into Maya, then you go into Rhino, then you go to BIM. There are all these discrete different processes. Soon it's going to be one single platform going from data to fabrication, and all the constraints are going to be written in. So the structural constraints, the environmental constraints, the building codes, and so on, everything's going to be there, and cost as well being monitored. So it's going to be a single kind of platform. Licensing could become a thing of the past. I mean, so this was again Wan Yu's work, which is they beat MVRDV in this competition. And what's happening now is that they're asking LookX to use AI to judge competitions. Well, if you use AI to judge competitions, then you can use AI to enter competitions, obviously, and they're doing that already. But what it then begins to suggest is that once you've got these constraints written into it, in the end, the building should conform to all the constraints. So the old-fashioned notion we have of kind of submitting planning proposals and someone looking at this and you go along as an architect, say, I'm an architect, here's my proposal. I think it'll all be done by data in the future. In fact, we wouldn't need to actually have them approved because they should already be conforming to all those constraints. So that begins to sort of kind of suggest that maybe some of the sort of techniques that we've had in the past or the traditions might disappear. This is ChatGPT with some comments on this. We won't read it out. As AI becomes more sophisticated, it will undoubtedly continue to disrupt the architectural profession, leading to a future where the role of licensed architects may be drastically reduced, if not altogether eliminated. The question now is not whether AI will have an impact on architecture, the architecture industry, but rather how architects can adapt and integrate this technology into their work to stay relevant in a changing landscape. And then finally, the final prediction that AI will be able to design a building completely autonomously. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be incredible? It was just like, at the moment it can't, But you know how Spotify knows your music taste. You know how the bots on the news can give you the news you want. You know how Amazon can recommend you books that you want, and so on. It'll soon be able to understand exactly what we like in terms of architecture and do something totally to fit our needs. That seems kind of obvious. In fact, if I were to sort of, but there's a danger in that. On the left-hand side, the self-driving car, and then and Leach Sedol. The self-driving car, the problem is that once you've got a car that self-drives, you don't need a driver. Once you've got an AI system that can produce buildings completely autonomously, potentially you don't need an architect. And Leach Sedol, on the right-hand side, in 2019, so in 2016, he was thrashed by AlphaGo. In 2019, he gave up the game of Go on the basis that AI was an entity that could not be defeated. So this is a chat GPT again. Okay. In the near future, architects may become a thing of the past. AI is quickly advancing to a point where it can generate the design of a building completely autonomously. This could spell the end of the profession as we know it, raising questions of what future holds for architecture in a world of AI-generated buildings. Architects who choose to ignore AI will be left behind and ultimately forgotten as the industry evolves and advances. Therefore, it is imperative that architects pay attention to AI and its potential to revolutionize architecture, or they risk sleepwalking into oblivion. So this is my advice. What we need to design right now is not another building, but the very future of our profession. We need to be recognized that there are things out there that are coming online fairly soon that really will cause us to rethink everything that we do. Now, those who do adapt will be okay. Those who don't adapt will struggle. I was studying at Cambridge, and we had a professor there who forbade us to use computers in the studio. The smart ones would use computers, then do these kind of fuzzy they would draw over them and to make it look like it was human drawn. And those who didn't use computers ended up being unemployable because you need to know computers. So just a couple of kind of comments. One, if you want to find out about this Digital Futures, there's this platform that I was responsible for setting up, and you can go online, and there's a whole library of YouTube sessions. And this was one we had earlier this year, where there are a series of tutorials, and you need to basically there are about a handful of people around the world who really know what's going on. So the only way you can disseminate that is have a kind of global platform, which is precisely what we're trying to do, and it's all for free. So you can find this online, and just follow Digital Futures on Instagram. Bavleen here is one of our team on Digital Futures. So let me finish off from another movie, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know if you know this one, Douglas Adams. Don't panic. Or, as we sometimes say in the UK, keep calm and carry on. But I think the point is this: we need to be aware of what is happening. Now, I'm not sure what the solution is, but when you're dealing with a problem, once you recognize a problem as a problem, it becomes a different kind of problem, one that you can deal with. So this is a kind of like a warning call that we need to, as a profession, need to be alert to this. Hollywood already is, but as far as I'm concerned, most architects are a bit like ostriches with their head in the sand. We need to be aware that these things are changing. And my point about AI is that AI is absolutely fascinating. It is incredible what it's doing. It is amazing. It's not that it's evil, because it doesn't kind of think and have bad thoughts, but it is it's so capable. That's what makes it terrifying. It is terrifyingly capable. We need to be aware of it. So I'll leave it at that. My apologies for the technical glitches earlier on.
Guys, I would like to open up this opportunity for you to ask questions.
I can't hear so well because I got water in my ear. But speak up. Yeah, I mean, ideally, yes, but if we can't stop Putin from invading Ukraine, how can we stop Putin from using AI? I mean, just to say one thing, Putin recognized early on about what AI could do. He once made this comment that said that whoever controls AI controls the world. Now, we could be thankful that Putin probably took all the research funds for AI and siphoned it off for building his private palace, right? But we haven't seen the kind of things that we could have seen. I mean, there's a guy, one of the computer experts produced a movie called Slaughterbots, where you have these AI-controlled drones that could come in and target you, recognize you, facial recognition, and so on. That's what he was worried about. We haven't seen that in Ukraine just yet. But how do you control these things? It's almost impossible to do that, unfortunately. I mean, yeah. Oh, I see. Привет, привет. So let's again learn.
So in a case if we can't really regulate it, what should we do? Should we like learn the technology
I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. I just don't think that it's it's so easy to regulate. I mean, you know what that letter was all about, that trying to regulate these things, and it's maybe too late. The cat is out of the bag. Yeah. Thank you. I'm not sure the best way to answer that, but it doesn't matter where it comes from. It's trained to start recognizing features on it. So I don't think you can start off with anything basically, and eventually you'll find that out. Daniel Bolojan is the guy who could answer that question much better than I would. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, well, there are a lot of questions in that, right? Okay, so first of all, I gave a talk in Nashville earlier this year to the AIA Large Firms Roundtable, which are the 60 biggest practices, Big and Gensler and KPF and all those kind of guys. And I was expecting them to be kind of skeptical, but they were nodding their heads the whole time. And I think these guys are alert to all these kind of questions. It is going to impact them. I guess, I don't know, I think so you've got large firms, you've got medium-sized firms, you've got small firms, and you've got the architects, right? The small firms can do a hell of a lot now. An individual firm could design, an individual person could design a city, so I think they will benefit from that. The architects, I think, are a different category, they'll be fine. But I think the real challenge is the fact that is that if it gets to the point, and I'm pretty sure the Suskins are correct, that people will start outbidding each other and say, I can do this much more cheaply. That's the real danger, because the pot of money coming into the profession is going to disappear. And it's happening in China. In China, the building fees are 1% to 2%, and nobody's interested in architecture anymore because there's no money in that. Which means, I mean, you can just about survive if you're a commercial company where you just stack it up and copy what you did before. But if you're trying to be experimental, like Rem Koolhaas or Zaha, whatever else, it doesn't make sense. It's just whatever. But universal basic income is probably the answer, frankly. I don't know how it's going to work in the States because of this suspicion of socialism. But I think the only way forward ultimately is to be able to tax these they're going to make lots more profit, these tech firms, and to try and find ways of distributing it. But it is going to be there's going to be some social unrest. Already there is a techlash, as they call it. You know, people are kind of Luddite. I can see people burning down Google offices, for example. No, it's going to, and as soon as people start losing their jobs, it's going to be a social issue. I mean, the curious thing was that Obama recognized this years ago, was talking about this, and I think Andrew Ng was also campaigning on that thing. But people just they don't recognize it until it hits them, and then they find out. But you know, it's going to be that. Yeah, I mean, AI is, I should just say, is good and bad. And I was working on this thing, and I decided to turn my book I was working on into 2 different books. One with a white cover, which is the kind of the angel, right, the good side of it, and one with the black cover, the dark side, the Black Mirror episode side of things. And in my course, the theory course, probably somebody on the course, one of the first assignments to do a Black Mirror episode about AI. We got some great results just at that, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks you again. I saw you mention a few strategies for resiliency against, you know, just like job loss, you know, outdatedness. So like other than, you know, differentiating your business or just different ways in social like repair, what are just some like practical things that we like as individuals can learn right now, like software?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, people are marketing themselves and saying, listen, I know this. And clients, I know, I gave a talk in Australia, and these guys were saying that the client, you know, wants them. Can you use AI? So that's a way of just, you can pick up on these tools and learn about them, and that will get you more clients. Well, I would say the one that everyone's talking about is LookX, because that is the version that FIU produced, right? And it's trained on architecture, as opposed to generic. I mean, Midjourney and DALL-E are just generic things. But that one is going to be. She launched, I think, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they got 20,000 users already. So it's really taking off. So I would say that's the one to get into for sure. Just, I mean, a comment. One of the kind of silver lining, I would say, is that if you think about it, the real problem that architects have right now is that the developers will make all the money, and we just kind of get a small fraction of something, right? But actually, if you think about what AI can do, we could become developers. We don't do it now because we think, well, how the hell we do it? But you could just go to ChatGPT and tell them, give me the first 6 steps to becoming a developer. And in the end, I think what is AI going to do in the future? It's basically going to do a spell check, but everything they're going to check on. They're going to be fact-checking things and so on. So you could enter into some domain you know little about, and you potentially would be protected by that kind of area. So I think those who are really imaginative will seize that possibility to try and do it. But you've got to be alert to this and see how things happen. But yeah, no, the world gets worse because I'm getting commissions now, and I'm just a bloody theorist, right? And people see my Instagram things and try and commission me. But so you've got to be smart. This guy at the back, yeah. Yeah, but the biases come from us. I mean, it's the data is human data. I mean, I suspect, I'm not an expert on this, although I'm hoping to get Tim McGibber in for the DDES to do a talk on this. I mean, I'm hoping a machine can be recalibrated, and I guess you could probably overcome some of those biases, but the biases are human biases, fundamentally.
I want to sort of focus more on your white book. It seems like a lot of the developments that are happening using AI imagery have to do with aesthetics and have to do with the known in a certain way.
With the known?
The known, yeah. So in a way, it's the problem of representation all over again. Whereas there might be a lot of much more interesting opportunities for AI to advance architecture in ways that we have not yet foreseen. And I wonder if you're in touch with some of those opportunities or developments or can think of, are there areas where architecture we can still think of it as something progressive that may evolve, beyond just imagining things that exist?
Well, it doesn't just imagine what is known. I mean, so what we were doing in the studio here was using cycle GANs and pairing up different things, like Zaha and an orchid or something like that. And you can actually, I mean, the problem about the early versions, like style GANs, they're just interpolating. It's like there's a big set of data and you're just averaging it. But once you start breeding one off against another, then you get completely new areas. And I always find that in my prompts, they're kind of weird. I can tell you they're weird prompts. If you can put like a grit in the oyster that will produce the pearl by putting in a word in that thing, it'll come up with something really strange. So it is always drawing upon these materials. I've got the word zebra in my things. In every single prompt, the word zebras. I don't get zebras as such, but it brings black and white contrast. And I also use, this is really bizarre, but I use the name of an Australian indigenous artist. And all of a sudden, I get bright colors, I get bright sunlight, and so on. And I began to realize that you need to kind of work with these kind of associations and do that. And it opens up, and you actually can't control these things. It's almost impossible to understand what's going on. But I first became alerted to that when you put the word house extension into it. And I didn't realize that that's a British expression. I didn't realize that. But I got these British buildings, and I got this kind of gloomy weather. And I thought, that's really strange. And eventually I discovered that you don't use that. It was home enlargement or something like that, you know. So I think it's very, very difficult to deal with these things. It's alchemy. It's not engineering at all. It's alchemy. But no, you can definitely get weird things coming out. It's not that. I mean, if you think about that simple, the astronaut on a horse, right? People always say AI copies. It never copies. It never copies. I once did like 5,000 images of Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion. Not a single one looked like the Barcelona Pavilion. They were all kind of variations of things. Humans copy. You know, people copy people wearing baseball cap, tunes and things. That's how culture propagates. So AI doesn't copy. But so if you thought that astronaut on a horse was that showed really what it could do. You know? Wow. You know? It searches and synthesizes. It doesn't copy. I think that's the mistake. Now, I was also involved in as a MIT Harvard publication that came out I was part of, and it was the only copyright infringement comes when you scrape material from the internet that is copyrighted. And that's the real obvious thing. But it's very, very unclear whether copyright will actually hold. And we'll find out in some of these lawsuits coming through. But so I think it opens up opportunities and way beyond what you would have thought of. That's my impression. That's a great question. I mean, time is the real issue. So on the one hand, there's something called Moore's law, which is basically the idea that technology speeds ahead. You know? And there was an industrialist called Gordon Moore who back in the 60s noticed on a circuit board the number of transistors would double every 2 years and the price would come down by half. So it's exponential. In other words, we're not doing 1, 2, 3, 4. We're talking about 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. And that's really what's happening. And I think we get exponential. And Ray Kurzweil applied it to all technology. And it doesn't strictly hold true, but things are speeding up. And for sure, that's the case. So the question is ultimately when. So the other thing is that nobody really knows what's being done right now. Because it's all kind of non-disclosure agreements and so on. But I know, because I know Wan Yu. I know what she's working on. I know what's going to come out in 2 to 3 years' time. And that's really it's going to totally transform things. Because the whole process of design, it's not going to be just images. It's going to be, the whole process is going to be completely changed. So I would say that's the time to look to 2 to 3 years' time, and it's going to be there. But then it's going to get better and better and better. If you think that Midjourney's just reached its first birthday, it's literally just reached its first birthday. You know, it's astonishing how far we've come in that time, and it's going to speed up. 1 year from now, goodness knows what it's going to do. Yeah, but the time is the absolute important question. Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry about the glitches in there.